Welcome back to How to Hyperbaric podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Masha, and today I have with me Dr. Jason Saunders. And we're recording part 2 of the episode that we uploaded last week. Today we're going to cover a very interesting topic. We're going to talk about anti-aging, wellness, and hyperbaric therapy, and how to combine this to get the optimal anti-aging / wellness protocol. The reason we're doing this is because a lot of people are asking. I mean, I probably get the most number of questions on wellness and anti-aging. Jason, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really, we were at a biohacking conference this past weekend, and the thing that kept coming up was that, that exact question, like, what is that program and what is the best protocol for that? And at the same time, hyperbarics is going through an interesting transition where I would say that traditional hyperbarics as an industry, hospital-based wound care, et cetera, like, I don't know that it's shrinking, but it's certainly not growing. It's stagnant at best. Meanwhile, on this side of the hyperbaric industry, it's growing tremendously year after year. And I would say that's the direction it's growing. It's growing in the direction of, is this a tool that I can use to improve my quality of life? Is this a tool that I can use to, improve how I feel or how I look or the process of aging? So yeah, I mean, this is like, I'd say the number one sort of indication, if you will, for, the future of hyperbaric.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because it's interesting, by the way, that you said that wound care sector is not growing. Does it mean that people are doing much better metabolically and not getting those diabetic wounds as much? Or because the medical...
I wish. I wish that was the answer. I think it's actually more because it's in a hospital setting. It's, at least in the US, it's so much more expensive. So it's getting harder and harder actually for centers to get hyperbaric approved for on-label use because of the actual amount of cost associated with it. So it's really becoming, even more underutilized that way than it used to. I'd say in my clinic and maybe in your clinic, there's less of that for those reasons, because, you're working with somebody metabolically, you're actually improving so many other avenues of where and why these wounds are occurring that would be the reason. But
yes, I wish that could be the reason too. Wellness and anti-aging is important, especially since we had the pandemic and we became more conscious about I'm saying as a whole, as humankind.
Right.
We became a lot more conscious about our health. We understand the consequences a lot better of not taking care of your health. And we're looking for new ways to prolong life and to increase health span, which I think is equally, if not more important, because it's super important to live long. Yes, we want to achieve a lot of things, but really it's the quality of life that matters, of how you live that life. And definitely hyperbaric therapy is one of the top therapies that we can use to achieve that.
100% agreed.
Now the question comes, everybody's heard about anti-aging studies. Everybody's heard that hyperbarics is used for anti-aging, but how do you actually use hyperbaric therapy for anti-aging? Let's say somebody has a home hyperbaric unit, or maybe they go into the clinic, right? Or maybe it's a practitioner who has an integrative clinic or a wellness center, and they want to introduce hyperbaric therapy in their center. What do they do with the hyperbaric chamber?
So I think there's like at least a dozen different answers to that, right? And so when I get that question, let's say with a consultation with a patient or a client, I have follow-up questions like, well, what are really the goals, and what equipment do we have access to, and what are we really trying to accomplish from like a mechanism standpoint? Because, there are certain things that could be done at any pressure, like improved, hyperoxygenation for increased ATP production. So there's certain things we can definitively do and do it quickly and do it even more regularly using, let's say, a more mild, home style hyperbaric chamber. And then there are some things that we think, you and I, or we've seen, that even, let's say, mild chambers have the capacity to do certain pieces, but haven't been studied enough to make these promises. Whereas, let's say, at higher pressures, they have been studied. And so, there's a little bit more data to support the use of higher pressures for certain components of that. So, and then there's I guess the longevity of the program that the person is going to do. In other words, somebody might say, listen, I'm willing to spend 2 or 3 months really dedicated to this. What kind of outcome can I have? Versus, hey, I'm planning on using this thing potentially for the next 10 to 20 years. What can I accomplish with this thing? Because that's a very different, in my opinion, very different approach as well. In other words, we could do a study that says, I added this therapy at high dose for a short period, like 2 or 3 months, and we saw certain changes, but we don't know 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, have those changes continued to shine? Are they starting to regress? Do we need to revisit that periodically?
For
And
example, sorry for
no,
interrupting.
go ahead.
I just came to my mind Dr. Joe Dituri, who spent 100 days at 1.6 atmospheres underwater. And then he had all these parameters measured, and he did reverse his biological age. So we can say, based on this case report, it's not a study per se, right? But somebody who spent 100 days, 1.6 atmospheres, has seen such and such changes.
Right.
It's not doable inside a like you cannot reproduce this inside a hyperbaric chamber because you need to get out of a hyperbaric chamber, right? Unless it's a hyperbaric home, which is a different story. We're not
Right.
going to
One day.
touch that because that's not kind of chamber that people have at their clinics or homes.
Right.
Now, the question I got this morning, for example, somebody sent me a message asking, can I lengthen my telomere length using 1.3 hyperbaric chamber? Do we have
I mean,
studies that prove that?
so we don't really have that study yet. The closest thing we have would be in comparing either at least already published on stem cells.
Mhm.
So we know that, on the higher end of pressures, at basically at 2 ATA on 100% oxygen, we've seen an increase in stem cell mobilization of up to eight times increase. And that's kind of like one of the landmark studies on stem cells that was done by Stephen Tom at UPenn a long time ago. And then about a year and a half ago, we had a study that came out of the University of Wisconsin, looking at 1.3 air only, right? So not even adding oxygen, just, room air at 30% increased pressure, similar to what like a home chamber might do without a concentrator. And he found between a 2.5 and 3 times increase in stem cells. So we know that at the lowest sort of practical end, 1.3 air only, soft chamber with just air, we could look at somewhere between a 2.5 to 3 times increase. And if you came to, let's say, my clinic in New Jersey and we wanted to go to high pressure at 2 atmospheres, it could be 8 times. So every pressure is going to somehow be somewhere in between, 2.5 and 3 up to somewhere around 8. But again, are we doing that for 1 month, or are we going to be doing that for the next year? Are we doing that for the next decade? Because, while 2.5 to 3 times might be significantly less than 8 times, it's still significantly more than 0. And
Mhm.
so if you do something that's more moderate, but you do it for a longer period of time, could you still expect some pretty tremendous outcomes? The answer, in my opinion, of course, is yes, right? The study that I finished last year, we haven't published yet, so we can't go into a lot of detail, but we also looked at biological aging and DNA methylation, like epigenetics related to hyperbarics. And it was interesting. Both found, so we did 1.3 versus 2.0. We did enriched oxygen at both pressures just to keep the oxygen percentage the same. And so, at 1.3 1.3 on oxygen, we saw certain genes that were definitively affected by that. And at 2 atmospheres on 100% oxygen, we saw certain genes that were definitively affected by that. There were also a series of genes that were affected by both. And but I was more surprised that the lower pressure had a very specific effect that the higher pressure didn't, and that the higher pressure actually had a very specific effect that the lower pressure didn't. And so therefore, there might be times or reasons why we should also look at doing a series of sessions at lower pressure, doing a series of sessions at higher pressure over the course of years to really try to maximize some of the effect that each one might have on our biology alone. So, we don't have that telomere study done yet at lower pressure, but certainly looking at biological age, there's certainly going to be significant effects at lower pressure as well as at higher pressure.
Wow, this is so interesting that you shared that because this is the first time I'm hearing the results
Yeah,
of
I
the
haven't
study.
really, I'm just finishing my dissertation and we're, drawing our conclusions and discussions from the work, but it's really, you know, I'll be sharing more of that obviously this summer, next month, or this month in the course that you and I are teaching in Madrid, because now that we're that close, I could start talking a little bit more about it. But it's really exciting to see kind of where the line of mild pressures are affecting inflammation. Where's that line of where those mild pressures are affecting epigenetics, which is obviously part of this wellness and anti-aging conversation. Um, in fact, there was, in the study, I'll just add this too. In the same study, for the first series of treatments, higher pressure had the opposite effect on aging, on some of those clocks, some of the aging clocks. So it actually, according to those clocks, it actually accelerated the aging process in the first window of treatment, and then it had a deceleration of aging on the second phase of the treatment. But I believe that that's really an oxidation conversation
Mhm.
where, higher pressure will create higher levels of oxidation initially, whereas lower pressure does not. And so the mild pressures throughout the study had, a slowed biological aging process from the beginning throughout the entire process. And then the higher pressure actually reversed. So in the short term, it looked worse, but in the long term, obviously it caught up. But just some really interesting pieces that came from that research that, I'm excited to also start talking about.
Wow, this is so interesting.
Mhm.
This is amazing. Like I have no words because I wasn't expecting to hear anything about that study. I was
Well, I
asking
wasn't
you
going to
for
tell
how
you
long.
yet, but
Yeah.
I was
So
I was
I know
writing it.
how
I was
to
writing
ask.
parts of it this morning, so I
Oh,
figured let
I
me.
know how to ask. Jason, but this is super interesting because this answers the question that people ask all the time. What if I do less pressure but more sessions? Is
Right,
it the same as doing higher pressure and less sessions? And intuitively, we were saying no, it's not the same. But now, thanks to the study, we have the answer that is backed up by the information that different genes are affecting. So it cannot be this, although some genes, as you said, are affecting, right?
right.
Affected both by higher pressure and lower pressure. And I wanted to add something. Methylation clocks are a much better
Right.
indicator of aging than telomere length. And
Right. So,
do anti-aging, some don't even look at telomere length because they say that it's such a vague indicator that we should look at methylation clocks. This is the first study, right? That was looking at methylation clocks.
so I don't know any others that have looked at methylation clocks. That was the reason I did it, was that, the
Mhm. Of
telomere information is super interesting and very exciting,
course.
mostly because very few things actually, it's one thing to slow down telomere degradation,
Mhm.
but to actually, grow telomeres and increase telomere length, that's not something that most other longevity related therapies actually even have the capacity to do. So there's some really good information there. It's a valid study. It's an exciting amount of information, but I don't know. And I think once we take that, what we're going to find from that is that not only did we increase telomere length, if we actually start to look at DNA replication and transcription, we'll start to see that we also have, less mistakes in our DNA replication and transcription process. I think we're going to find that we can improve the, cellular replication process, because all of these things are ATP dependent. And I don't believe that hyperbaric just grows telomeres randomly. I think what it's really doing is it's providing enough cellular energy to wake up systems that are just not operating at the highest capacity due to the amount of, cellular stress that is ultimately affecting so many people. But when it gets the energy to do so, it corrects a lot of other processes, telomeres being one of them. But to your point, I don't think that speaks to the DNA methylation and the biological aging clocks that I think are more accurate. So we looked at telomere length as well in the study that we did because I wanted to have a comparison. But the primary focus was on the methylation panel and the biological aging because I think I think in the future that's going to be a better series of tests. We're getting the data that we collected. The company that we used is also now having a new uh, Yale University has basically come out with like a new way of evaluating those same DNA methylation clocks. And so they asked if they could take my data and actually have Yale put it through their new process to see if that changes any of these other answers that we're getting. So in the next like week or two, and hopefully maybe before Madrid, I'll happily share that if I have it before Madrid. Um, but if we get that information, that's going to tell us a whole new series. And what they're doing is they're not just saying, blanket statement, DNA methylation panel, biological age equals. They're separating all of the pieces of the DNA methylation that we measure. It's over 900,000 locations, CpG ions. But they're clustering them into like your liver health, your immune system health, your neurological health, your cardiovascular health. And so they're taking these models on DNA methylation and breaking it into systems and then looking at the system specific effect to say, well, this had a broader effect on liver function or liver health. This had a broader effect on cardiovascular health as an example. So, as soon as I have that bit of information, I'm excited to share that because I think that's going to shed also a lot of awareness on, exactly what are we doing with this device that you and I love so much.
Yes, we adore this device. I could spend an hour and a half in it. No, a little less than an hour and a half. Wasn't feeling too great, and an hour, and I felt amazing. And it
That's
never
it.
fails. This is the thing; it never fails. So,
So to answer that actual first question we started with, if we wanted to definitively say that we wanted to try to grow telomeres by 20% in 3 months or less, we'd really have to, follow a study that had already done that, right?
mhm,
So we know that study that was done in, I think it was in 19,
mhm,
where they had, 16% reduction in cellular senescence, they had 20% increase in telomere length. There was a specific protocol for that. So if we wanted to try to recreate the exact same effect in the same time frame, then we would have to certainly do the same series of treatment. That's what's been, in the literature, that's what's been proven to work. At the same time, we also know that through other work that's being done by either by myself or other people out there that, there is this time factor that we need to start thinking about. I know you and I have been thinking about it, but just in the industry, we need to be thinking about more and figuring out over longer periods of time at lower pressures, what kinds of things can we understand to affect. I look at the mild pressures. I mean, that's what I use in my home, even though I have an office with multiple hard chambers and good high pressure whenever I want. Most of my sessions in any given calendar year are also done at mild pressure. I look at that as like a vitamin dose. It's not, I don't have a wound that I'm trying to heal. I don't have some, massive disease that I'm trying to solve for. I'm looking to optimize my cellular function through boosting my oxygen levels. And so I don't need as high of a level of pressure of oxygen. And so it's not I look at it less as a drug and more like a vitamin, right? It's a solid boost and we can create a lot of benefit, a lot of ATP production. We can still create a lot of immune related functions, stem cell mobilization, reduced cytokines, and have epigenetic effects even at that dose. And so, while I may choose to periodically do higher pressure just as a different shift in my protocol, and because let's say the study that I just did showed that the higher pressure is going to do certain things that the lower pressure is going to do. I also know that the lower pressure is doing something that the higher pressure isn't. And, we're learning how to combine those into a meaningful protocol, not over the course of a month or two, but over the course of a lifetime. Just like you would go to the gym and exercise, not just to get fit for like a particular moment in time, but to have fitness for your quality of life. oxygen is a fuel that literally helps fuel that system over that same period of time. And so, we have to look at hyperbaric as a solution for certain health issues. Absolutely. But if we're talking about it from a quality of life and longevity standpoint, if I grew my telomeres 20% in 3 months and then I never go back into a chamber again, do we actually know what the effect is going to be 5 years from now? The answer is, of course, no. But if we know that it has a positive effect on our health and I'm using it somewhat consistently for the next 5 years, should I expect that it's going to have some benefits for all of those years? Well, of course, that's part of the healing process. So, anyway, I look forward, I think we said last time, we spend literally an entire day on the top 40 off-label uses of hyperbaric in the course that we're teaching. And so we go into all the details, and you'll get to share your protocols. I'll get to share my protocols. You and I haven't even necessarily compared notes on all of those. And so you and I will get to see, differences in what we're both doing, which is a lot of fun too. And then the attendees in the course get to see different perspectives on the same type of indication, and that you're getting great results, I'm getting great results. And so there's not a one size fits all answer to any of these questions. I'd say there's like a roadmap, and that roadmap should provide direction, but then there's specifics about each person, about each clinic, about each chamber that allow us to steer that direction even more specifically for each person who we're trying to help.
And this is a taste of what people are going to get during the course, what we discussed today. I wasn't even expecting that. I was literally listening with like all my senses, my eyes, my ears, everything to absorb that information. And my brain didn't stop because I had all these questions that I'll be asking, of course, in Madrid when I see you.
Of course.
It's amazing information. Congratulations on getting the study done and getting all this information, because I can only imagine how much work on everybody's part that was, but how groundbreaking it's going to be for the industry to see all of that. This is absolutely amazing. Jason, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I'll see
You're
you in a
quite
couple of
welcome.
weeks.
Always loved hanging out with you. Can't wait to hang out with you in person in a few weeks.
Me too, and the whole families. By the way, my daughter can't wait to see your kids again. They've all grown up so much since we last saw you guys. Information about the course is in the podcast description. There's still places and there's still time to sign up for the course to get all this great information and to get certification, provided that you pass the test. But we do our best. So
we do our best. We have a high success rate.
We do. That people pass the test, and we hope to see you all there. Thanks.
Take care.